lot of people say, where's the money? What happened to the $11 million? And when I sat down with my friend who worked for Fitch, Eric Kim, ultimately, like what he figured out or what he concluded from looking at those audit reports, and especially the latest audit report that's from the new auditing firm that is not the auditing firm that I think we can safely say missed a few things in its previous reports in the districts. So we have a new auditing firm. They came in and it really reinforced Eric's conclusion that the money isn't missing. We spent it. We mostly spent it on people. It's not that surprising of a conclusion. By far, the largest source of expenditures for the district are teacher salaries and benefits for employees. It's not administration. It's not busing. It's not restorative justice. It's not any of these other things. It's just teachers. And what we spent the money on was school.
Welcome back to the Montclair Pod, everyone. I'm Mike.
And I'm Farnoosh. And at the top of the show, that was none other than Andrew Rice, who we told you about last week. He's a local dad and a contributing editor at New York Magazine who recently started a new Substack devoted to our schools called My Montclair Education.
And this conversation couldn't come at a better time because, as we all know, we have a vote coming up on Tuesday, or maybe not. It all depends on some pending litigation. A local resident, David Heron, has filed a lawsuit seeking to stop that vote, which will more or less determine whether or not we'll be raising taxes to fill a $20 million school budget hole, or if we'll be cutting our school's budget by more than $10 million and taking on a state monitor. We'll link to all of our coverage in our show notes.
Yeah. And later in the program, we're also going to talk a bit about something that touches on how local journalism works, or sometimes doesn't work, in a town like ours. As listeners know, we frequently cite and discuss reporting from a number of outlets, including the Montclair Local, the New Jersey Monitor, Patch, Tap Into, Montclair Girl, and others. Montclair is fortunate to have several organizations paying close attention to what's happening here.
Yeah, and specifically, we've often highlighted the work of the Montclair Local's reporters, in particular, Matt Kadosh and Asa Jung. They've both joined us on the podcast before, and those were terrific additive conversations.
Recently, we reached out to invite one of them back on the show to talk about a news story. This time, however, the reporter told us it wasn't going to be possible, and it appears it could be a new status quo.
Yeah, and that was a bummer for a few reasons, not the least of which is that we think that Matt and Asad's work should get as much exposure as possible. So later in the episode, we'll spend a few minutes reflecting on that, and more broadly on the role of collaboration, conversation, and amplification in a local media ecosystem. More on all of that, as well as a new installment of our sponsored series, Ask an Agent. Karen Diana of Compass Montclair is back, and we're talking curb appeal and screen appeal. A lot of sellers invest in staging the interiors of their homes, which is important, but there's more to catching a buyer's eye than that.
Let's start, though, with our conversation with journalist and local dad Andrew Rice about our schools. Andrew is originally from Columbia, South Carolina. He's an author and contributing editor and features writer for New York Mag. His writing has taken him into some pretty fascinating territory: dictatorships, democracy, New York real estate, African politics, witchcraft, baseball.
Wow. And most recently, our beloved town of Montclair, which also has witches.
Yes, it does. And Rice has recently added a new title to his resume, the founder of My Montclair Education on Substack. He calls it a journalistic exploration of the town's school budget crisis.
Yeah, it launched a little over 2 weeks ago, and it couldn't be more timely because, I don't know if you heard, we have a referendum coming up. Maybe. Could be. Possibly. One of his most recent pieces is entitled, Where Did the Money Go? Yeah, that's the question we all continue to ask. And he did a bit of sleuthing. So take a listen.
Everybody, please welcome to the cult of covering Montclair schools, Mr. Andrew Rice. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, thanks.
We're so grateful for this volunteer effort on your behalf to dig deep into our school crisis. But we got to start with the big question with genuine empathy. Why would you do this to yourself? Are you okay?
So it started off actually as something I got paid to do. So that would be the beginning of the story. About a year ago, I started working on an article about the decline in student achievement nationally for New York Magazine. And I spent months working on that story and talking with experts nationwide about all the contributing factors that have gone into this really dramatic drop that we've seen in standardized test scores that, really scary numbers, in terms of, 1/3 of eighth graders nationally not being able to sort of read on basic texts and so on. So I started trying to figure out what are the contributing factors that are causing this decline. And in the midst of reporting it, I was also as a parent, following the fact that we had a new superintendent, I went to an introductory session where she spoke. I actually participated in some of the forums about having to do with the search even prior to that and the strategic plan for the district. So, I went to this meeting in July. They just sent a vague email out sort of saying, we'll have an update on our budget situation. So I was there when she announced that, the budget situation was we had no money. And this was a shock. And it was not only a shock to me personally, but it was a kind of like called for some reassessment of the story that I was doing, because while I've been looking nationally at things, I've been kind of ignoring the story at home or thinking that the story at home was just really something that was personal to me and not necessarily interesting to readers. So I ended up writing about that for New York, writing about, our persistent achievement gaps and all the contributing factors that go into that. So that published in October, November, and then a lot's happened since then. And enough happened that I think sort of the beginning of this year, I thought to myself, I spent all this time researching this both for the story that I did for New York and just kind of as a busybody, sort of trying to delve into these things, creating my own spreadsheets, talking with my friends who happen to also be sort of somehow professionally have some expertise in budget stuff and so on. And I thought, I felt like I'd learned some things and wanted to share them. So I started writing them down. And the Substack is called My Montclair Education. It's basically sort of just my own personal side project.
Yeah. How do you like Substack?
I mean, I hadn't used it before. I mean, I obviously been reading other people's Substacks. So,
right.
This is my first experience with it. And, I think it reminds me a lot of, of sort of early blogging in the sense that, anybody can kind of hang out a shingle, and the platform is kind of optimized to be idiot proof, and so anyone can kind of create. You can't do much with it. You can't make it look all that. You can't either make it look great or make it look terrible, which in a way has a very leveling effect on the platform. And so I found it interesting, and I'm having fun playing with it.
Well, we have lots to get into, including one of your most recent articles, which is titled "Where Did the Money Go?" which is a great title. But first, let's talk a little bit about you. You're from the South, and you worked for papers in Philly and DC. You lived in Uganda as a fellow. And then fast forward, you're now working for New York Magazine and living in Montclair. Was it just a gravitational pull to move here because this is such a media town? Or was there something else that brought you?
Well, I mean,
Montclair?
To get to the subject of the conversation, I mean, I moved here like so many people, like as the cliche goes, for the schools, and I moved here from Brooklyn. I mean, my story is exactly the same.
No, Brooklyn.
What?
Moved here from
I've
Brooklyn.
heard of it.
Child was 3 years old. I mean, essentially, just sort of. This was 2014. I guess I was looking around for a house here, but we closed in early 2015. My son went to Montclair Community Pre-K for a couple of years. I happened to live across the street from Bradford, and so luckily enough, we got our placement in the magnet system. Happened to be the school that was across the street from our house. So, like, for a few years, we just really had a very idyllic kind of suburban situation where my son just walked to school every morning, and it was easy to think that everything was just fine with the school system. But like a lot of people, when I got here, I remember neighbors sort of telling me, the school system isn't really what you might think it is, and me sort of like rolling my eyes and saying, okay, buildings look fine. It has 3 teachers in his kindergarten class. Like, how bad can it be? And but really, over time, I think some of the shortfalls of the system have become clear. That's not to say there's still great things about the system, and part of the reason why I state very openly in the first of the columns I wrote, like I'm very much in favor of voting yes on this referendum. Part of the reason why, I am is because I think it's important to preserve those things that are good. I think it's also not mutually exclusive to recognize that there are so many ways in which the schools currently do fall short, and that I just don't think that taking money away from them is the answer to seeing those shortfalls.
You wrote this book a few years ago called The Year That Broke America. And I wanted to bring it up because I couldn't help as I was reading the description, and I want to read the full book. I wanted to get your thoughts on, in the process of writing that, and now, of course, writing about Montclair and living here, if there's any connections. And I'll give the quick summary. Basically, that book zooms in on Florida in the year 2000. There were so many things going on that year in just that one state. We had the Bush Gore election. We had the Elian Gonzalez saga. We had, did you know this, Donald Trump briefly flirting with a presidential run? I totally forgot that. And then, of course, it was 2000. So we had bin Laden's guys arriving there, connected to 9/11 to take those flight lessons. So your thesis was like in that book, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Florida sort of became this petri dish, or sort of this foreshadowing of like all of the change that America was about to experience on many levels. And it was a retrospective book, right? 20 years later, you're looking at, all of these signals. And as you're covering Montclair now, it may be a stretch to say this, but I sort of feel like what's happening here is not unique to us, right? We are sort of experiencing all of this turmoil around our school education system, financial turmoil, but also structural and all the things. And I wonder how much of this is we're going to look back and go, oh yeah, Montclair was sort of like in the early days of what now is ricocheting across the country.
I mean, first of all, as we were joking before when we came on, I think that the common thread seems to be them writing about systems in decline. And hopefully someday I'll get around to I'll be able to write about systems like on the upswing. But it doesn't seem like that's kind of the macro story of America at the moment. I think the thing that really struck me when I was working on this story about Montclair and then publishing it for a national audience was how much people in other places really responded to what was going on here. I was frankly sort of concerned that when I was writing the piece for New York, that people would think that we were sort of like an odd, self-absorbed community that didn't really have any kind of anything to say to people elsewhere. But the responses I got, and I've really never in my career gotten responses like this. I get emails from people that were paragraphs and paragraphs long talking about the commonalities between the situation I described here and the commonalities in wherever their community was,
So beyond New York, everywhere.
All over the country. I mean, a lot of them coming from, I think, suburban communities where people had high expectations for public education and were feeling in one way or another that the system was broken, that it wasn't delivering on what it was supposed to deliver to children. And, you don't want to catastrophize the situation and say, that we're sort of uniquely messed up right now because, if you look back, it doesn't seem as if I don't remember public education being sort of a flawless structural system like at the time that I went to public schools in Columbia, South Carolina, which were at the time some of the worst public schools in America. I happened to go to a good one, but the system overall was pretty weak. So you don't want to kind of overly, feel as if we're sort of uniquely messed up at the moment. But it does seem as if that the data tells us that we're seeing a lot of achievement declines that are real and they need to be addressed. And something structural is going wrong with the system. A lot of it is evidenced here in Montclair. I mean, that's, first of all, our persistent racial and economic achievement gaps, which are partly driven by declines at the low end. But also, one of the things that's interesting about Montclair is that one reason that the gaps persist and widen is that at the high end, we have a lot of kids who are getting all kinds of supports because they're getting them outside of school, they're getting them through tutors and so on. So you have this kind of divergence between the majority of kids and the kind of like top 10% of kids who are doing better than ever. And that's certainly evidenced in Montclair. And then the third thing that's really evidenced here in a big way is this is this idea that for all of our spending, and our spending keeps increasing, what we're putting into the system keeps going up and the results keep stagnating or going down. And so the question is, how are we spending our money and what are we spending our money on?
Yeah.
Yeah. We will link to that New York Magazine story in our show notes. Everybody should read that. But I have to ask you, slight non sequitur, but where would the Montclair pod be on the famed New York Magazine matrix? We want to hear it from you.
Oh, certainly highbrow brilliant, like right there. Wow.
We were going to say like mid-brow, mid-brilliant, but
Yeah,
but,
I mean, we didn't want to.
but you went full.
You did an episode on like the crafting resistance. So I think that like, definitely
Fried
highbrow.
chicken. Yeah. I mean, it's like Pulitzer Prize winning.
I'm comfortable just being right there in the middle of that upper right quadrant. I mean, I don't need to be in the top corner, but definitely want to be in that
Sometimes we're
top.
despicable, and that's okay.
Yeah,
you can't win them all. And if everyone's agreeing with you all the time, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right.
All right, let's continue to talk about your reporting from Montclair Education at your Substack. One of the most recent pieces is entitled, "Where Did the Money Go?" One of the central tensions in the article is this divide or debate in town of people who want to focus mainly on fixing the crisis and those who are like, what happened to the money? I'm not giving you another cent until we know exactly what happened with the money. Governor Mikey Sherrill, I think, is more in the latter camp based on what she said on our show when she was on a few months ago, or at least that's how it seemed to us. She asked, how did we get here? She demanded answers before proposing to raise taxes. Why do you think that divide has been so hard to bridge? They seem to be mutually exclusive ideas for some reason.
Well, I think part of the reason is that the district and the superintendent, for good reason, haven't really wanted to focus too much on the question of forensically figuring out what happened. I think because, and I say for good reason, I guess I mean it's understandable why, because A, it's not going to really make people want to vote for the referendum. And I think that I'm intellectually interested in figuring these things out, but as I say in the piece, it's hard to kind of, once you look at some of the patterns of spending and sort of start delving into these questions. I mean, people quite reasonably say, why should we give more to this system that is spending so much money and seemingly has spent it foolishly, or at least accounted for it foolishly? I think we can get into how it was spent in a minute. So the superintendent, for good reason, doesn't necessarily really want to go deeply into that. And secondly, it's not really constructive to her purposes, because her purposes are trying to figure out how to get past the crisis. And the question of sort of like dealing with the crisis right now that's happening right now, which is that we need the $17.6 million one way or another. So having a discussion about what happened before doesn't really solve that problem. And I think that's the problem that she's rightly focused on right now. But that doesn't mean that like the people like us, that people who are journalists or people who are accountants or people who are lawyers or people who have public policy experience in the community shouldn't or can't try to figure this out. And so a lot of what I've written about in these Substacks, I tried to construct it. I mean, there's a group called Impact that I'm sure you're familiar with. And I talked with them a good bit. They've been producing these like really, really like substantive, granular reports and white papers about the structural drivers of the deficit and how we got here. I wanted to do something a little bit more journalistic, I guess I'd say, and more about like my own personal attempts to try to unpack this. So a lot of like what I've been writing about are sort of my interactions with other smart Montclair residents, trying to talk with them and puzzle it out and figure out what went on here. So in the second installment that you referred to, what happened to the money, I have like a whole scene where I just sat down with a friend of mine who works for Fitch Ratings in their public finance department. So basically like does this for a living, and going through the audit report. And we went through the hundreds of pages of the audit report, and at the end, he's like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't read these reports. They're filled with gobbledygook. Right. And so like if the guy from Fitch like can't figure out what's going on with the district's finances, that says something.
There's a general sense, especially from people who are a little bit removed from the details and the nuance of this situation to just talk about it in terms of competence. Like, everybody's incompetent. And it's not just about the budget stuff. You know, we've all had situations where we see something going on with the schools, whether it's like a bad teacher being moved from one class or one school to another, or like a decision being made about spending money on something that some people think is stupid. And then a lot of people are just like, these people don't know what they're doing, you know, and there is that temptation to just paint that with a broad
jump to
brush,
conclusion. Yeah.
you know, and I'm wondering, you know, you actually have spent the time to dig into the details, to go through these long reports. What do you say to people who point that finger, I guess?
I mean, I think there's clearly, at best, incompetence and maybe much worse that occurred under the previous administration when it came to accounting for finances. In my third installment, which came out Monday, I look at all the sort of human and political factors that contributed to this and the kind of sort of state of denial that seems to have fallen over at least the administration as to the state of the district's finances sort of circa around 2023. And basically, that's the point at which this dynamic of pushing bills from one year to the next in order to basically tide themselves over until the next fiscal year started. You know, a lot of people say, where's the money? What happened to the $11 million? And when I sat down with my friend who worked for Fitch, Eric Kim, ultimately, like, what he figured out or what he concluded from looking at those audit reports, and especially the latest audit report that's from the new auditing firm that is not the auditing firm that I think we can safely say missed a few things in its previous reports in the districts. So we have a new auditing firm. They came in and it really reinforced Eric's conclusion that the money isn't missing. We spent it. We mostly spent it on people. It's not that surprising of a conclusion. By far, the largest source of expenditures for the district are teacher salaries and benefits for employees. You know, it's not administration. It's not, busing. It's not restorative justice. It's not any of these other things. It's just teachers. And what we spent the money on was school. And there's a good argument to be had about like whether our headcount of staff is too large. And I think that they've already had some layoffs, and clearly they're probably going to have some more in any eventuality. I think that the superintendent has talked about sort of right sizing the district's headcount. I think ultimately, one of the reasons why it's difficult for the superintendent and the board to talk about what happened in the past is so much of it had to do with good intentions that they had, mandates that they had to fulfill, whether it be for special education or whether there are moral mandates that they felt we need to hire counselors because coming out of the pandemic, we had this explosion in mental health challenges. They hired a lot of people to address what seemed like real crises and wanting to do the right thing. And, ultimately it turned out that we couldn't pay for it within the budget that we had. And unfortunately, we're now going to have to lose some things. And really the question is whether we lose a reasonable amount or whether we lose a really catastrophic amount.
Right.
And that's why I'm voting for the referendum, because I don't want to lose a catastrophic amount.
Yeah. And Superintendent Turner has said repeatedly that there's no missing money. And, you just talked about like we spent it all on the schools. Can you dig more into that structural math, though? Because there's the structural math and people are like, nope, it was corruption. And we'll talk about that in a minute because we have to. But the structural math, right? You're talking teacher salaries, which of course with that comes the health benefits, which have skyrocketed. What else is in that structural math? I mean, it's super boring, right? And it's really exciting to like go and I looked into it. I've done some investigative reporting in my past, and I looked into the business manager and her connections to like the East Orange School District that people talk about a lot. And, why do we hire all these people who also happen to be from East Orange? And, what about the bus contracts? And it is pretty shady, like some of the bus companies that we contract with. And certainly,
your rundown of the bus companies was like, that's That's a mini series, I feel like, the bus companies of New Jersey.
I had no idea until I started looking into this that the New Jersey school bus industry there's a grimy underbelly there. It
Who would have
reminds me of
thunk it?
sort of like A Most Dangerous Year, that movie with Oscar Isaac, where it was
Oh, yeah, exactly.
the corruption in the fuel oil business in New York. It's like once you get into it, it's really it's like really eye opening. These companies they're driving our kids to school are run by pretty shady folks. So there is. Like, we live in New Jersey. I say this in the piece. Like, we think that we're in this progressive island, but the school district is the largest source of government expenditure in our town. And we live in a town that's in a county that's controlled by a democratic machine that runs on patronage and always has. And is one of the most powerful democratic machines in the country. So, of course, there's like patronage and contracting that you could probably look very closely at and maybe some people would get in trouble. But ultimately, that doesn't really separate us from all the districts around us. What separates us from all the districts surrounding us is that we have spent way more, and we have gotten into a way deeper hole. So what are the drivers of that? So the drivers are, number one, transportation. There's been a big increase in the cost of transportation. So setting aside the question of like whether the bus companies are run by gangsters, they're also costing us a lot of money. All those contracts are run through the county government. So we have limited control over the ability to economize because the county basically does the RFPs and awards the contracts.
Yeah.
So that accounts for about a couple $1 million last year. Actually quite a bit more, I think, and maybe $4 million. A few million here, a few million there. It starts to run together. So that's one of them. Health benefits is, as you mentioned, another. Salaries, just essentially like having to hire more people than we anticipated, largely because we're fulfilling special education mandates, it seems like. And yeah, I mean, those are really the big ones. It's, people, things, buses, and benefits, insurance.
The superintendent has said that our district in the past had an inability to say no, and clearly maybe an inability to let go of teachers when the math wasn't mathing. Enrollment's dropping. We have all these people on staff. And what do you think about that? Like, did you look into that and maybe that's in your latest piece, which is sort of like the political dynamics of what was behind the scenes? Like, why was there such an inability to cut costs where we could?
Well, I think that a couple things happened. Number one of the things that happened is that for a long time we had money. We had extra money.
Yeah.
First of all, in circa around 2014, we had a surplus in our district. There was a big controversy. Everyone was arguing about how to spend the surplus. Basically, what happened is the business manager during the great financial crisis, who, by the way, is Dana Sullivan, who's back now as an interim, had basically made overly conservative projections in terms of how much things would cost and how much taxes need to be raised. So we raised taxes too much, and district ended up with this huge fund balance. You hear this term fund balance. Basically, they ended up with more money at the end of the year than they had to spend. And over the course of a few years, it built up. And by state law, you're not really supposed to keep that as like just a kitty. So some of it was redistributed to taxpayers by not raising taxes, or I think even some abatements. But then also there was money to hire. Circa around 2014, 2015, hired a bunch of people. Did things like expanding world languages in the elementary schools. Did things like hiring curriculum support teachers for the middle schools to help middle school kids who are struggling in reading and math to catch up. Did things like expanded the special learning communities in the high school, hired some teachers for electives for those special learning communities. If all these things sound familiar, these are all things that are being talked about maybe being cut now. Then fast forward, after that happened, we had a couple of years in which there was both turmoil in the front office among the superintendents. We discovered that the staircase was falling down at the high school, so we did this bond referendum. We had COVID when we discovered that the ventilation systems were completely decrepit, and that was also part of the bond issue. And so money was sort of coming in to address our sort of facilities needs via that. And the third influx of money came in circa around 2022, which I write about a lot in the Substack as being the key inflection point year.
Yeah.
We got about $8 million in COVID aid. Our state aid also went up during that period. And suddenly we had more money. Dr. Pons at the time said, well, we're not going to be spending this on recurring expenses. We're going to spend it on things, one-time expenses. We're going to spend on this and that. But money is fungible. And it seems like basically the fact that we had this federal money coming in, because it coincided with a large hiring increase, you have to conclude that basically the fact that there was money on one side of the budget to do these one-time expenses freed up money elsewhere to do hiring. And by the way, again, back to what I said before, hiring for good things, hiring for like social emotional learning, hiring for redeploying teachers to restorative justice, because there are so many really valid kind of calls from the communities about things like discipline inequities and so on. And then just special education, a lot of special education classifications, recognition, I think, that of the supports that special education kids need. There's a really large increase in the number of special education teachers circa around 2022, 2023 that was meant to sort of address needs that kids had in their IEPs that were not being addressed. And, you add that up and you come to 2023, the next year, Christina Hunt, the newly hired business manager, says we've got a $7.5 million deficit this year. And then what happens after that is that there are giant protests. The high schoolers walked out of class and picketed the BOE, chanting, like, no justice, no peace, screw the BOE. And what happened? And there was a whole movement among local people to redeploy the pilot funding, which is a wonky thing we don't need to get into. But basically, they wanted to take money that they felt the township was hoarding and redeploy it to the schools. Township said, thank you very much. We're going to keep the money. And so basically, there was this budget crisis in 2023 that was relatively small compared to what we're in now, but the dynamics were similar. And what ended up happening is Dr. Pons and Christina Hunt told the board at some point, we solved the problem. We don't have to lay off all these people. And then a couple more budgets went past where they also sort of said, we're doing okay. And then Dr. Pons died and Christina Hunt left under the circumstances she left under. And we know what happened next. We know that we found out that in fact, our fund balance that used to have a surplus was gone, and we couldn't make payroll. Like when I was sitting at that meeting in July, Sullivan said that they had to move money around just to make payroll in June. And basically what happened is that I think for human reasons, these individuals we don't know what Dr. Pons was thinking because he's no longer with us, but it seems like he was working towards a new contract, which he did get, and he was applauded. And a group of parents came to that, came to that board meeting and celebrated the fact that there was stability in the district, and finally we had a superintendent who was sticking around for more than a year and a half, and everybody was really happy about that. And maybe nobody really wanted to check the math too closely.
Wow. Maybe one last question. We just spoke recently to Superintendent Ruth Turner in her office, and one of the things that she's focusing on with this forensic audit coming in this summer, hopefully, is to find out in terms of how we spent the money. Was it spent in a way where it was, I don't want to say ethical, but in some ways we have to, like, when we contract for things, right? Whether it's to build a baseball field or rebuild a staircase or whatever it is, there's a process, right? You have to triple bid. Food services is a great example of that. Did the district go through the proper steps of vetting multiple contractors and getting the best quotes before agreeing to a deal where there are kickbacks, things of that nature?
I have to say, yeah. I mean,
only a forensic audit would know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't completely understand how, I have to confess, I don't know exactly what a forensic audit will and won't find. My friend Eric Kim at the last school board meeting, he's talked a lot about wanting a forensic audit, but his understanding and his reasons for wanting a forensic audit are different than the reasons that I think a lot of people think that a forensic audit is like Columbo comes in and figures out where the money is.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think what a forensic audit is more along the lines of what you're talking about, which is like a really, kind of like colonoscopy of the district's spending practices that maybe they'll find out that there's some criminality going on. But really what it is just sort of like actually figuring out where there are inefficiencies and so on. So Eric is very much in favor of the forensic audit but actually he thinks that the state should pay for it because because he says the state monitor statute suggests that they're supposed to conduct a forensic audit in circumstances like this. Set that aside for a second. I mean, I do think that clearly, if you start digging into the contracting, you're going to find stuff. And this is true of government contracting anywhere. I mean, some of it's not that our district is uniquely corrupt or run by particularly nefarious people. This is just kind of how government contracting, especially in a place like New Jersey, works, where you do have a patronage machine at the county level and at the state level that does a lot of this sort of stuff. I mean, I think the food services contract, clearly there's something very stinky coming.
And it ain't just the food. Yeah. This is the former one, by the way, not the new one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the totality of the situation, including the fact that there were significant overages, the fact that the food, by all accounts, according to the kids, sucked.
There was no cap on the overages.
Yeah. A little telltale sign that there's something going on there is that the district is suing over it and trying to collect on its insurance bond. So it must feel that there was something rising to the level of something that would merit a legal claim related to it. I'm just judging it. I'm not judging it based on rumors. I'm judging it based on the district's actions, which is that bringing a lawsuit saying that there are unauthorized changes made to that contract seems like a pretty significant step.
Yeah, it just seems like we have these two parallel paths. Like on the one hand, there is concern that maybe they're not necessarily full-on self-dealing, but certainly some level of corruption or problematic behavior in the awarding of contracts, perhaps, that things, because of the way politics works in general and patronage, that perhaps the wrong vendors were chosen for certain things. So on the one hand, that could be true, and that's probably true everywhere. On the other hand, there are these systematic budget issues where you are capped at increasing taxes by only 2%, where real costs are going up by more than that every year. And that second situation is more likely responsible for long-term increases in this deficit as opposed to individual things,
Look, I think this is a systemic problem that we have in this district, in this community, maybe just in our democracy at the moment, which is that we are unable to discuss the big things. Sure, it's fun to discuss, I guess, it's interesting to discuss what's going on with the food services contract, but the cost overruns there are modest. It's less than $1 million. Material, right? And we don't want there to be corruption and in the cafeteria business on top of the corruption in the school bus business and so on. But nonetheless, it's not really moving the needle a lot in terms of what's going on and what's causing our structural problems. And I think to go back to the story that I wrote for New York about educational achievement, I made the observation at the end of that story that we've been talking about so many small things in our district, whether turf at the baseball field. I know that people are really passionate about it, but the baseball field, ultimately it's paid for out of bond funds. The point is it's not a big deal in the whole scheme of this, whether a few trees get chopped down or whether we use artificial turf like everybody else or not there. Similarly, the calendar. I could not believe it when, at the school board meeting, the superintendent laid out this really troubling whole list of potential cuts. Consolidation of schools, going to 30 kids per class, potentially, at the middle school and high school. Lots of layoffs, potential loss of JV sports, and so on, if this referendum fails. And then the first question from a board member was, I'm looking at the calendar and we haven't celebrated Veterans Day in the past. Why are we celebrating Veterans Day in the next year's calendar?
But the emails. Yeah, this is not just a Montclair thing. You're right. Our democracy is, we love to obsess over the I don't know, what do you call it? What's that category of stuff? It's just like
The shiny thing.
the bar chatter, the stuff that's like not moving the needle, but it's
easy to talk about those things, right? So the baseball field is like,
it's easy to talk about
it's
these
an
things,
obvious,
right?
like, nice thing. It looks nice. You see it when you're riding on the train, you see the baseball field and you think, gosh, they spent an awful lot of money on that baseball field. But the thing is like what you don't see are the health benefits. What you don't see are the contractually scheduled salary increases for all of our employees that go up every year at a rate that's greater than the rate of inflation, or greater than the cap that we can raise taxes by. So like it's easy to fixate on these things that are physical, that are seeable, that we know are there, and that are easy to get angry about. Whatever the merits of the baseball field are, pro or con, it's something you can see it. It looks nice, and that's why people fixate on it as an example of waste in the district.
Yeah, but that's the thing that people go nuts about and assume that somebody was getting a kickback to do the $8 million field versus, and it's just people are quick to look for blatant corruption or just assume it's there because they don't understand. And I get that, that instinct that people have.
They may be right. There may, but the corruption isn't what is bankrupting our district.
Yeah.
And I think it's possible to hold these two ideas in your head at once, which is that there are rotten things in the system that need to be addressed. There are ways in which the schools are falling short and disappointing us, and there are ways in which the system is broken. But the answer isn't to deprive the system of money and to do these sort of draconian cuts that will ultimately only hurt the system by creating an enrollment flight issue that will send the district potentially into a sort of doom loop of endless enrollment declines and cuts in services, which at some point will likely lead to property value declines and thus to Montclair becoming a less attractive community. So I don't want that to happen, which is why I am voting yes on March 10th, and I hope all your listeners do too.
Well, Andrew, we could talk to you for hours. We really appreciate your time, your insights, your deep reporting. We will link to your New York Magazine article and, of course, your Substack. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the other side of this vote, hopefully. Please don't be a stranger to the podcast.
Well, I'll be happy to come back, hopefully to talk about something more exciting and happy.
All right. Thank you, Andrew Rice. Andrew's clearly one of those people who doesn't sleep. He's got the magazine work, the Substack, the parenting. We can relate. You can check out My Montclair Education on Substack. It's mymontclaireducation.substack.com. And you can also read him on or in New York Magazine. His latest article is about how a new Hollywood is being built right here in Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on the show. Truly, I mean, it meant a lot to us, especially this week. It was a reminder of how valuable it is when journalists are willing to step out from behind the byline and actually talk about their reporting.
Yeah, and that brings us to something we thought might be useful to talk about for a few minutes.
A little bit of a behind the scenes of how local journalism is operating in Montclair. Now, asterisk, most of you will find this boring, but the media people listening might get a chuckle out of this.
Yeah, because as listeners know, we reference reporting from a lot of outlets on this show, including the Montclair Local, but also the New Jersey Monitor, Patch, Tap Into, Montclair Girl, Impact, Andrew's new Substack. Mm-hmm. There are quite a few people doing important hyper-local work covering this town.
And that's a very crucial thing. We really believe that a town benefits when multiple journalists and outlets are asking questions and digging into stories and sharing information. Our philosophy has always been that local journalism works best when reporting circulates widely and conversations happen across platforms. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not my newsroom versus your newsroom. At least that's not what it is for us.
Yeah, our approach with this podcast has always been pretty collaborative by nature. When someone publishes an important story, we often invite the reporter onto the show to talk about it. Terrence McDonald from the New Jersey Monitor has been on a number of times.
Yes, and the founder of the Montclair Girl, Jennifer Casson-Tripucka, has happily agreed to come on the show in the coming months. And I mean, who's busier than the Montclair Girl? She's also the Hoboken Girl, the Bergen County Girl, all the girls, Mike.
Yeah. How many girls? Is she going to be more girls?
I hope so. I think so.
She's got growth. Definitely, she's got growth plans. She's doing quite well. It's enviable. And not to mention, we've been cited in reference too. New York's Pix 11 came to Farnoosh's house and interviewed us when we broke the story about our ballooning school deficit back in September. Our Mikey Sherrill interview got picked up widely, including by NBC. A local documentarian is using quite a bit of our podcast audio and footage for a short film on our school budget crisis.
In short, our philosophy is that more is more. And seriously, how lucky are we that we have all these dedicated news outlets and community groups in our town, because most have zero. We're definitely not a news desert, so let's celebrate that.
Yeah. One outlet we've highlighted quite a lot on the show is the Montclair Local. Their reporters, Matt Kadosh and Asad Young, have done a lot of thoughtful reporting on the schools and other issues in town. You should definitely read them.
And a few months ago, they actually came on the show, our podcast, and we had a very fun, insightful conversation. Funny, actually, how we would like to take a road trip, a van trip, and visit Christina Hunt. We have to do that still. I think.
Yeah, I hope that's
in our
not
future.
off the table.
I hope it's not off the table.
Yeah, it would be so great. And we can get road food. Anyway, so recently when Matt published a story about the school district audit, we reached out to see if he might come back on the show to talk about it.
This time, however, we were told that would not be possible. Matt told us that, quote, just doesn't work for my publisher, but thanks for reaching out. So then, like the good journalists that we are, we went to the source, Liz George, the publisher of the Montclair Local, and asked for more on this. Like, is this a new policy? Is this permanent?
And she didn't really answer those questions, so we're not sure. She did say that with the election approaching, their reporters need to focus on producing new reporting for their readers, and that appearing on the podcast wouldn't be the best use of their time right now. And look, we get that. Running a newsroom is hard. They're very productive. Journalism takes time and resources. We respect that. But I was a little surprised. Were you surprised?
I was so surprised. Were you surprised? I was surprised.
A little bit, because I didn't get the sense that this was just this week. And it reminded me of the time back when we were about to launch the podcast. We actually reached out to the local to see if they would be interested in a little bit of collaborating. We suggested a few ideas like, hey, what if we gave you some short written articles based on our episodes that they could publish? And then if they liked them, they could link back to the podcast, or we could give them the embed for the podcast. And then, of course, we would do something for them. We would create a recurring segment where one of their reporters could come on and talk about the week's stories and drive ultimately listeners back to their homepage, their reporting. And those ideas really didn't go anywhere. They weren't really into those ideas, but we kept the door open.
Yeah, and eventually Matt and Asad did come on the show for that episode, and we felt like, all right, they were warming up to the idea of us working together.
Yeah, and we'll continue sharing and citing their reporting whenever it's relevant.
When we started this podcast, we really never saw ourselves as competing with anybody, to be honest. We operate in a world of abundance, not scarcity, especially in this town. There's enough to go around for everyone, if that's what anybody's worried about.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if the New York Times was like, our reporters can no longer go on the Brian Lehrer show. It's just like, it wouldn't make sense. It's not a good look. And it's like, it's not doing anything for the New York Times. You want to get these stories out to as many people as possible.
Right. The more platforms talking about good reporting in this town, the better informed the community will be. And ultimately, the more it elevates the work everyone's doing.
Yeah, 100%. So we hope that this is not a permanent thing. We hope they'll come back on. We hope they continue to be successful in their work and they continue to pound the pavement, and that this does not create any prolonged weirdness.
All right. Moving right along. The snow is starting to melt. Spring is around the corner, which means the Montclair real estate market is about to heat up again. And it's time now for our sponsored segment, Ask Our Agent. This week, it's with Karen Diana of Compass Montclair.
What's Karen got in store for us today, Farnoosh?
Well, in our conversation, Karen explains why curb appeal still matters, but why what she calls screen appeal may matter even more. We talk about how home buyers experience homes online before they ever step inside, why sellers should start preparing their homes months, sometimes years before listing, and the exterior upgrades that can dramatically boost a home's value. Take a listen. Karen Diana, welcome back to the Montclair Pod.
Hey, Farnoosh. Great to be back.
Great to see you. All right. We want to learn about staging, but less about the interior and more about the exterior. You say this is actually a big area of neglect that many sellers have. Tell us about why it's so important to have curb appeal.
Sure. So In my opinion, curb appeal is how a home feels when you see it in person for the first time. It's the landscaping, the architecture. It's that emotional reaction when you pull up and think, I like this. And that definitely matters, but it no longer comes first. I think that screen appeal is the home's first impression online. And today, it's often the deciding one. Buyers experience a property through photos, video, floor plans, and social media way before they ever step inside. If a home doesn't photograph well, or show its layout clearly, or feel compelling on a screen, many buyers will never even schedule a showing, no matter how charming it is in person. I think that sellers feel that they paint an exterior or shutters or their front door maybe once or twice in their ownership. But it really should be considered something to do as an update right before you sell your home. And it's an expense that a lot of sellers don't really want to incur because it is not a small one. And it's something that you can become desensitized to, is how the paint of your exterior house appears online and in person.
I got to ask, these videos I'm seeing of these homes these days, they're so polished.
Right.
What goes into it?
The house has to draw on the emotionality of a potential buyer on their phone. They are looking at a seller's property first on their cell phones. And as much as you can give them in the shortest amount of time possible is really ideal. Attention span is very short online, and we want to be able to produce something within 30 seconds to a minute that is really going to capture somebody and initiate an interest in coming in and taking a look at the property.
Now, back to the exterior, you might have a lot of snow piled up in front of your home. How do you work around the season to give your home that glow?
Basically, sellers should be reaching out and engaging with their agents months, if not a year or years before they are ready to sell their houses. Agents should be used as consultants on how to produce their property when it's time to sell. And a house that's coming on the market in February, March should really be photographed either the summer before or as late as the fall, right before it's listed in very early spring of the following year. The photography might not pop as much as it could if it was a summer image.
That's a great point. And then talk about some inexpensive things you can do. If you can't, paint your whole house before putting it on the market, because that could be 5 figures. What are some smaller, wise investments that you can make on the exterior that can make a big difference?
Really, I hate to say it, but paint is so crucially important. And there are several ways in which a seller could have access to $10,000 or $20,000 to prepare their home for sale that their agent can really help them find. Whether it's through the brokerage themselves, Compass offers this concierge service where we can lend a seller money to prepare their home for sale. There are home equity loan options that you can consider in order to spend $20,000, $25,000 that could yield $50,000 to $75,000 more in a purchase price. Also, exterior stagers that will come to the house and plant flowers or bushes. I just engaged with this lovely woman, Deirdre, that had spent a lot of time at this property that I have on Montclair Avenue, just putting in very strategically placed and weather-friendly plants all throughout the front and the back of the house just to give it a little bit more life.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Karen Diana from Compass Real Estate. You can learn more about her and her team at thehomecollectivenj.com. And I have to tell you, I love this concept of screen appeal. It totally makes sense, and it's true. They call it real estate porn sometimes. It can be quite addictive. But if you've got good pictures, and have you ever done any of those like virtual reality kind of home tours? Those are kind of amazing too.
No.
Yeah, like some of them are like it's like Google Maps, but in a home.
And now, for a preview of next week, we want to share a bit of an interview with NPR's David Folkenflik. He's a media reporter and local resident of many years who experienced the unthinkable when his mom was killed crossing the street outside his house.
And what makes this story all the more upsetting is that he knew it was a dangerous intersection and had warned the town a number of times before the accident happened. Here's a bit of that conversation.
So one of the things that we discovered was that people seem to treat a lot of intersections in residential neighborhoods that were at times either thoroughly residential or at times within a few blocks of slightly more semi-commercial areas like Upper Montclair on Valley Road or near Watchung Plaza, as though these were inconveniences. They treated these intersections a little bit as though they were off-ramps or on-ramps to one of the state routes nearby. And you just saw cars smack into each other. One of the things I've never seen before, I've lived in California, of course. I went to school in upstate New York. I lived in both of the Carolinas, North Carolina longer than South Carolina. I lived in Baltimore and in Maryland for years, and DC for years, and New York City. I've never seen something that I saw here, which I give as a granular data point rather than an all-encompassing obsession. But I've never seen the thing where people come to the four-way stop, and when the light turns green, they expect to be able to turn left ahead of incoming traffic. And if incoming traffic is not graciously allowing the guy turning left on the other side to go, that guy will then try to speed ahead of you.
Yeah.
Now, this is a desperately dangerous move. I've witnessed it lead to people sort of hammerheading into each other at intersections. But it also means that pedestrians who are walking, when that light turns, that's their first opportunity to walk safely, given the way most of these intersections operate. And it means that pedestrian has essentially no time to get through. And it's something that I've noticed. I noticed these cars wishboning. Twice cars came up onto my property through accidents. One time they came up into my front lawn. Another time a guy ran into trees, right? There's nothing other than blind luck than the fact that there weren't people walking on the sidewalk outside my house at that time. And that said to me this was a problem. So, I had been trying to flag this as an issue for some time, and we can talk about that. But it seemed to me as though, it's a brilliant community, a lovely place, a wonderful residence. And the people who were driving like that were not people driving the way they would in their own street. And I thought that this was, a real problem waiting to happen. In fact, it just was a real problem.
So that was David Folkenflik. You can listen to the whole interview next week when we'll also be talking to Montclair's new Complete Streets director, Jacob Neiman, about his plans for making our roads and pathways safer and more efficient for drivers, bikers, and walkers alike.
And of course, next week, we're going to have the latest on the school vote, the never-ending saga. But now let's get into the news.
First up, County Commissioner and Montclair resident Brendan Gill announced last week that he would not be seeking re-election to the Essex County Board of Commissioners. He made the announcement on X and linked to a story on the New Jersey Globe by David Wildstein, which broke the news. We'll link to that in our show notes.
Mike, the Montclair Local also has a story about this by Rodrigo Torrejon. We'll link to that as well. See what I did there?
Yes, that was really nice of you. Very generous with the linking. In a statement on X, Gill wrote, "After 15 years, I've decided not to seek re-election to my Essex County Commissioner seat. This work has meant everything to me. I'm deeply grateful to the people who trusted me, challenged me, and walked this road with me. Thank you for the trust and the chance to give back."
In addition to his work as a county commissioner, Gill is the chair of the Democratic Committee of Montclair, and he has his own public affairs and political consulting company called the B. Gill Group. He unsuccessfully ran for Mikey Sherrill's congressional seat, and in the past also served as campaign manager for both former Governor Phil Murphy and Senator Cory Booker.
Next up, a staffing change at the Montclair Fire Department is raising new safety concerns. The township has ordered the fire department to cut its staff, reducing the daily minimum staffing from 16 firefighters to 14 firefighters, which the firefighters union says will make the town less safe. We reached out to the union and they provided a statement. Here's part of that statement in which they talk about the impact of the cuts.
The union says, quote, members of the public will experience an increase in response times because fewer apparatus and personnel will be responsible for the same amount of work or more. There will be a reduction in the ability of on-duty firefighting staff to complete essential tasks in a timely manner during emergency responses. All of this will result in a decrease to the township's public safety.
Town leaders say the firefighter staffing cuts come down to one thing: rising costs. In a story on Montclair Patch by Eric Kiefer, Township Manager Stephen Marks says that the decision is tied to a sharp increase in the municipal employee health insurance, which is up this year by approximately $3.75 million, a 33.5% increase over last year. through no fault of the township. That's a quote.
Marks continued. He said, if the township were to accept this cost and pass it along to property owners, it would result in a municipal tax increase of over 6.39%, which is obviously a non-starter. The township cannot absorb such a large increase in one line item, and we are looking for opportunities to reduce spending while keeping municipal taxes stable. Gosh, sometimes I wonder what he would do if he was the superintendent of Montclair schools.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe they should switch jobs for a day or a month.
That's a great idea.
Man,
that's like a reality show, right?
It's true. Yeah, for
Boss
sure.
swap. Instead of mom swap, boss swap.
And here's another thing. I don't know if we want to tease this now, but we are in touch with the fire department. We're going to do a tour. We're going to bring you inside the Montclair Fire Department and maybe do a ride along. And I hope they let me drive the truck. Do you think they'll let me drive the truck?
I hope they have enough insurance.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they're very well insured. I mean, what could go wrong letting Mike Schreiber drive a
What could
fire?
go wrong? All right, let's bring it home. A date for the annual Montclair Pride Festival has officially been announced. It's going to be on Saturday, June 13th, according to Out Montclair, which puts on the festival. Head over to outmontclair.org for more information.
And that's not the only summer festival that's coming to town. The Montclair Jazz Festival's Downtown Jamboree will take place on Saturday, August 15th. Head over to montclairjazzfestival.org for more information on that. And, you know, there's also the African American Heritage Parade and Festival on June 6th at Nishwayne Park, the 4th of July Festival and Parade at Edgemont, so many others. So head over to montclairpod.com/festivals, where we'll share information about all the festival events. And if you have an event that we haven't included that you think should be on the list, just email us at hello@montclairpod.com and we'll get it added.
Are we done?
Almost. We got the one big thing. All right, what are you doing this weekend?
This weekend is my daughter's birthday celebration bonanza blitz at the one and only Dave & Buster's.
Oh my gosh.
Don't be jealous, Montclair.
And what day is that? Is that on Saturday? You're going to Dave & Buster's?
Don't ask for specifics. I don't need
fine.
we don't weirdos showing up.
Yeah. All right. But can I come? I mean, I've got a big birthday weekend this weekend too, but I love me some Dave & Buster's.
I would love for you to join. I have a party room with some, nachos and burgers, and my daughter wanted this blue raspberry lemonade fountain thing, so that's on the menu.
How many tokens does each kid get?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I'm hoping enough because it's a 3-hour shindig, and I hope kids don't come up to me
Did you
with
just
their
give them
hands
cards?
out.
Dave & Buster's has those cards now. It's not even tokens, right?
It's cards. Yeah, and they better learn how to pace themselves, kids, because the bank of mom and dad is closed.
I mean,
Dave
can you
&
imagine
Buster's.
if you're just if it's synced up to your credit card and it's just they have unlimited and it just keeps on refilling with your credit card?
That's
and
called
you do
the
that for
iPad,
20
and that
kids?
is that's not happening. And so maybe that's why they suggest breaking up the afternoon with a face painter or a juggler or something, or a balloon guy. I don't know, but I didn't do that. So wish me luck.
I'm going to bomb in on that and just make fun of you the whole time. I'll take pictures of you losing your mind.
I might.
We'll post them to the Instagram.
I'm going to be nervous. I got to keep track of 20 kids at a dark Dave & Buster's.
Don't you have some help? Who's coming?
Well, yeah, I'll have my obviously, I told the parents, I'm trying to say, hey, you're welcome to stay. There'll be food and beverages and all that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
But Costco's right there. I won't blame them if they do a drop off.
Dude, about the only thing worse to me, after going to Dave & Buster's would be going to Costco. I mean, Dave & Buster's would be so much better than Costco on a Saturday, assuming this is on a Saturday.
Okay, clearly you do not spend your entire week with second and third graders.
Dude, Costco.
Sometimes you need sometimes you need a solo stroll through Costco with nothing on your list, but you're just in Costco.
Yeah, but if you want to buy something at a Costco on a weekend, then you're going to be stuck in line. I went to a Costco recently where I was I needed a pair of pants, and I liked their pants at Costco. And popping into Costco to buy a pair of pants, it was I went in there and I was immediately I need to get the fuck out of here.
Yes. I have a rule about shopping at Costco. If you're going to Costco for fewer than 5 items, please don't go to Costco. It's not worth your time or the savings. Like I was in line behind someone who was at Costco and all he had in his cart, God bless him, was 1 roll of Christmas wrapping paper. And I had to wonder, do you not live near a CVS?
It's so
Do you
funny.
not live near a paper source or a dollar store for that matter? Why are you coming to Costco? And then another day, a guy was just buying our $5 rotisserie chicken. Now, sir, I know $5 is an unbeatable price.
Their chickens are really good, though. I mean, like, for some
But
reason.
one? You came all the way to Costco and you only got yourself
If there's
one?
no line, I get it. But, like.
There was a line, sir.
Yeah.
I was behind this guy.
Yeah.
And I wonder about these people. I worry for them.
Vanessa goes for a hot dog. She goes with Heather's mom, Nana, and they just get hot dogs at Costco.
I introduced my
It's like
kids
their
to the
thing.
Costco hot dog a couple of weeks ago. And their lives changed, I think, in that moment. Yeah.
It's a good hot dog for $1 or $1.50
So
or whatever.
cheap. I couldn't believe the receipt.
It's the lost leader. It's the lost leader. Well, speaking of Vanessa, it's actually her birthday month. And so this is the big birthday weekend. And so we are doing something on Friday night and we're doing something on Saturday night and we're doing something on Sunday with the brunch with the in-laws. It's going to be all birthday all the time. It's going to be...
Happy birthday, Vanessa. We love you.
Yes, we do. We love you.
She's our number one fan. She listens to the show right when it comes out.
Yeah, that's right. And she was in that reel that you had her
Take
in.
Take your Galentine to bar method. Yes.
Yeah.
She's a great sport.
Yes, she is. All right. So last but not least, I want to pay a little tribute to somebody who we sadly lost this week. And is not a Montclair guy, but he's relevant, and you'll see why in a second. So there's a guy named Coleman McCarthy who, when I was in high school, taught a class in our high school called Peace Studies, and this was what he devoted his life to. He was also a columnist, though, for the Washington Post. He was a very well-regarded guy, but he volunteered his time at our high school, and he did it at another high school too, teaching every day seniors about the history of peacemaking and tactics and things like that. We had all sorts of readings we did and projects, and there were no grades. It was just about learning this stuff. And he was so generous with his time and spirit on this. He rode his bike from DC to Bethesda. Like you would always see Coleman on his bike. And then years later, when I decided to go to journalism school, where we met, Farnoosh, I needed a letter of recommendation, and I called Coleman up, and he had this kind of accent. And you would call him up, and he'd be like, "Michael, are you fighting the good fight?" And he would, he was happy to write this letter of recommendation for me. And I don't know what he wrote, but I got into the school and everything else is history. But I thought of him, obviously because he passed away. But, he's an example of what can be done in a school with a little bit of energy and creativity. He kind of created his own little magnet program there at BCC High School. And he did it for years and years and years. And so many kids were impacted by him. You should have, I'm not really on Facebook anymore, but there was a real outpouring of love from people in my grade. My sister took the class, like all of my friends took the class. And so to Coleman McCarthy, a life well lived. Thanks for doing all you did. Thanks for my career in journalism too.
I'm thankful for Coleman McCarthy.
Yeah.
Wow. What a great story. What a great legacy.
Yeah. We'll link to his obituary in the show notes. You can read
Thanks
up
for
on
sharing
him.
that.
Sure.
And thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll have some news.
Yeah.
One way or the other. We will, of course.
We shall see.
See you in town.
See you in town.
Politics, witchcraft, baseball.
You're a witch. No?
What?
You wanted banter? There's some banter for you.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. You don't do witchcraft.
Nothing against witchcraft. I wish
there
I
is
could
that
do
witch.
witchcraft.
Didn't we interview a witch once in Montclair?
Yes, House Freya.
Oh, that's right. She's a witch.